Testimony Tuesday with Joey Pontarelli. Today on The Simple Truth, we consecrate everything to the Sacred Heart of Jesus through the Immaculate Heart of Mary and the pure, strong, chaste heart of St. Joseph. I'm your host, Jim Havens, and our guest today is Joey Pontarelli, Catholic husband and father, founder and president of Restored. Restored gives practical advice and tools to help teens and young adults cope, heal, and grow from the trauma of their parents' divorce or separation so they can feel whole again and thrive in every area of life. You can find it at restoredministry.com. But Joey's here to share some of his personal testimony with us, and we'll get to the good work that he's doing as well. But Joey Pontarelli, welcome to The Simple Truth. How are you today?
Jim, great to be with you, man. Doing pretty well.
Great to have you. Yeah, it's a blessing to have you with us. So we always begin at the beginning. What was your early life like, your family, the culture that you grew up in?
Grew up in a Catholic family. From my memory, we would go to Mass on Sundays, pray before meals, but faith was never something that was super deep for me until actually after my parents' divorce. It was really difficult, traumatic thing that I can get into maybe a little bit later. But after that, through some good friends, I was able to get much deeper into my faith.
All right. So Catholic family growing up. So you would have been baptized as an infant, first Holy Communion around second grade or so. What age would you have been when your parents divorced?
Yeah, and that's exactly right. I came from a big Italian family. I'm one of 6 kids. I'm number 2, actually. So I have 5 brothers and 1 sister. And went through all the sacraments, and I would say my mom of everyone in the family was like the most faithful one. But even if she was here speaking with us, she would say she never had maybe the full formation she wished she would have gotten. And so then come along, I was about 10, 11 years old when my parents split. And, I remember the day when they explained that they were getting divorced, and it just absolutely shattered my world. It brought so much pain, so many problems into my life. And, I remember just not being able to cope with that news as a boy and just hiding in the closet and crying and sitting in the closet. I couldn't put it into words then, Jim, but I felt abandoned, felt unwanted, felt like I just wasn't good enough, even though my parents didn't intend that. That's just how I internalized all this. And so just, sitting there in that closet, just didn't know what to do with this news. And in the months and years that followed, dealt with all sorts of pain and problems, like emotional problems, anxiety, depression, loneliness, a lot of anger for me as a boy. Dealt with relationship struggles. I remember after my parents split, just saying, I will never get married. If this is where love and marriage lead, like why in the world would I ever want to, go down that path and repeat that cycle? And I became really afraid of that, really terrified that I one day was going to get divorced, was going to repeat that cycle. And then probably most destructively at that time, I just fell into bad habits. That was my way of coping with the pain I was experiencing. A friend of mine introduced me to pornography. That really became my drug of choice, my way of numbing all that pain. And even though in the moment it made me feel good, afterward I just felt so empty, and I knew I wanted to be happy, and it wasn't making me happy. And thankfully that wasn't the end of the story. It was a happier ending, but it was a very rough spot to be in as a boy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I guess when did faith, I guess, come back around, or even to say during that time, was there any sense of where is God in this? What do you remember?
Absolutely. Again, having somewhat of a faith formation background, I definitely knew enough to kind of question, God, like, where are you? And especially over the years as a teenager, that was one of the main questions that I struggle with. Like, God, like, where are you in the midst of this? Like, why did you allow this to happen? Like, why did you allow my family to fall apart? Why did you allow my parents to separate and later get divorced? And, it took many years to come to an answer to that question, which I'll touch on in a little bit. But yeah, it was certainly after really my struggle with pornography and hanging around friends actually who weren't good for me. So, I played baseball a lot growing up. I played travel baseball, especially, was very time consuming. I was spending a lot of time with these guys who, didn't always have the best influence on them, and therefore just didn't have the best influence on me. And I remember just even spending time with them, I was not very happy. And then I met this new group of friends, and these people were genuinely happy people. And I didn't totally know why, but eventually discovered that the root of their joy was their Catholic faith. And so I just wanted to be happy. That was it. And so I just started to be like them. I started to pray. I started to build virtue, to seek out God's plan for my life. And that was a game changer for sure. So I would say it was like the early high school years was when I really started to make that transformation, and had a great parish priest who really helped form me. He became my spiritual director. Had the religious order in the area that would do like a boys camp, and that was really formative as well. And so that was, I think, like out of the pain came this like opening for God to step into, and he did, and that really transformed my life.
Wow, praise God. Yeah, that's a great time to meet a set of solid Catholic friends early high school years. So where did this group come from? How did you encounter them? Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, no, great question. So it was in Northern Illinois. So I grew up in the Chicagoland area, Arlington Heights to be specific. And then later, this group of people we met lived closer to the Wisconsin border, if anyone's familiar with the area. But anyhow, I think through all of the brokenness in my family, my parents separating, my mom recognized that we needed community. And, as we were getting older too, she wanted us to be surrounded by just good, wholesome people. And so we, went to a new parish, and that was again when she was getting more into her faith, I was getting more into my faith, siblings as well. And so we just found this great parish, and the families that would go there were, like I said, awesome. Started to spend more time with them, eventually moved up north to be close to them, and that, like, kind of having that culture of families that we could literally walk down the street, spend time with, was just huge. It was very transformative for me, even healing, I would say, because I think love is healing. But yeah, that was really big. And, I ended up playing baseball with one of my closest friends, James, and he was the opposite of those friends I mentioned earlier who were a bad influence on me. He was a great influence on me, and some of my other friends as well, just were really pivotal. But yeah, just kind of building a little Catholic culture. And, it's no joke that the human person flourishes when we're in, deep and right relationship with God. And when we build like little Catholic cultures, like that's literally the purpose of, Catholicism, obviously get us to heaven to help us become saints, but we want human flourishing. And that, I got a taste of that growing up.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well said. Joey Pontarelli is with us. And so the parish that you were then going to, so was that quite solid? Was that quite helpful? Was that flourishing as well? And then what about schooling? What was the school situation like, and how did that look like?
Yeah, absolutely. No, parish was hugely impactful. There was two different parishes, actually, one really close to the home, one a little bit further from the home. And the both priests were amazing. The one priest who was at the parish really close to home, we go to daily mass there. And he actually had been a married man. His wife passed away because of cancer. Eventually discerned a vocation to the priesthood, Father Lang, and he was just very, very solid. And so a lot of the definitely like the intellectual formation came from him. And then there was another parish eventually when he was moved away that we got more involved with, and that parish was the one we kind of originally mentioned, just having a lot of great families and just very solid, reverent liturgy, and just pretty vibrant, community overall. So that definitely played a huge role. And I think, like it's the litmus test of every good Catholic parish, like how often are they offering confessions? How often are they offering Eucharistic adoration? And both those parishes had it a lot. The one parish during Sunday Mass, or multiple priests who were hearing confessions, the other parish before daily mass, like you can go whenever you wanted to. And there was, perpetual adoration in some places. And I definitely was deeply impacted by that. We also had a good youth group. We would do things together, and mostly I think we would just study our faith and discuss it. And it became pretty normal to, like I was saying before, pursue virtue and pursue God's plan for your life, and to pray. And my friends and I would encourage each other in that. And man, I just don't know where I would be without them.
Yeah, what a blessing. And then school, what was that like?
Yeah, school. So I actually was homeschooled for the majority of my schooling up until college, actually. Then I went to a secular junior college. I played baseball at the junior college, got some kind of general ed out of the way. Then I transferred to Franciscan University, where I finished out my 4-year degree, and I loved Steubenville, loved being there, every bit of it. and studied finance. Eventually did my MBA as well, and I landed in the business world. And so, but no, the education on the homeschooling side, there were, just had a great experience homeschooling. There were a few things that I think maybe could have benefited from having mentors like in the sciences. I think that's an area where I perhaps could have excelled more. But overall, I'm just extremely grateful for my mom, especially, who really pursued giving us a great education and doing that through like a homeschool structure. So I know homeschooling now has become much more popular, but at that time it was a bit, countercultural. Yeah, but I was really grateful for that, and was able to even test out of like a year of classes, not because I'm like smart or anything, but just there was a good program to help us do kind of like AP CLEP exam things. And so that was really helpful. But, through that as well, learned my faith better. But yeah, that was the situation. And going to the secular school was a unique experience as well. I'd always played sports with, my secular friends who I love, don't want to put them down in any way. But they weren't my closest group of friends. They're not the people who I necessarily wanted to be like. But, playing baseball in college too was a new experience. And so that was something I was grateful for, but ultimately I knew that I longed to kind of yet again be brought, kind of grown, developed, formed in a Catholic community. And that's what led me to Franciscan University.
Outstanding. Joey Pontarelli is with us, restoredministry.com, to learn more about him and his good work. Joey, what were the years that you were at Franciscan?
I was there from the spring of 2013 to 2015 is when I graduated. So, I was a transfer student, so I didn't have the full 4 years there.
All right, very good. We'll pick it up there when we come back with Joey, find out what happened from there. What was his discernment like? Was there any vocational discernment? We're going to get into more of his personal testimony when we get back. And then as we head into the second half of the show, we'll get into a lot of the good work that he's doing with restoredministry.com as well. Stay tuned. Welcome back to The Simple Truth. Jim Havens here with our guest today, Joey Pontarelli, sharing some of his personal testimony with us on this Testimony Tuesday. Joey is founder and president of restoredministry.com, and we're going to get right back to Joey and his story in a moment. But first, I want you to remember about iCatholic Mobile. Do you know it's the only Catholic mobile phone company in the U.S. today? And when you subscribe to iCatholic Mobile, you do help to fund the Station of the Cross. Check out iCatholic Mobile, iCatholicMobile.com. All right, Joey, we left off, so college years, and any sense during these years, was there a sense of discerning vocation? Were you always pretty sure that there was a call to married and family life, or were you kind of unsure? What was the discernment like? Anything to share there?
Yeah, I definitely seriously consider the priesthood. There was a couple of religious orders in my life through high school, and one I even spent quite a bit of time visiting and discerning with. At one point I went to live with them for really as long as it took to discern whether that was the right fit or not. I ended up only staying 2 weeks. It became very clear at the beginning that it wasn't the right fit for me. That was at the tail end of high school, like beginning of college. From there, I was totally open to where God led me, and through a lot of spiritual direction and prayer, it just became more clear that he was leading me towards marriage, which honestly scared the heck out of me. Because if you remember from my story, after seeing my parents split, I was terrified of love, of marriage. I didn't especially want to repeat what I saw in their marriage. And I'd heard some kind of scary stats that, if you come from a divorced family, you're like 2 to 3 times more likely to get divorced yourself. And so it was definitely an unsettling experience. And so when I started, entering the dating world around that time, getting into college, I felt pretty lost, pretty incompetent at it. And, definitely had a lot to learn, and thankfully had beautiful marriages around me that I was able to see and learn from, and even be inspired by, just understanding that, okay, yes, many marriages do end in divorce, but there's also some that are really good and beautiful and healthy. And that I knew that's what I wanted. And by looking at their example, I was able to see how I might go about doing that as well. And so through that, I dated amazing women. And through that, just felt God calling me to that vocation to really, break that cycle in my own life of dysfunction, of divorce, for my kids, for my marriage. And yeah, it just became very clear that was the route I was supposed to go, even though I did seriously consider the priesthood.
Mm-hmm. And did you have a sense that, we have a lot of preparation, rightly so, in one preparing for life as a priest before ordination? There's a lot to go through. Religious life, there's many years of preparation. Did you have a sense, it seems like you did, that there was preparation to be done really for everybody, but in particular because these concerns that you had were so close to you, that so real for you? It seems like you knew there was work to be done personally. Were you focused on that, building yourself up in virtue as a man, in particular for the vocation of marriage, kind of, quite a while leading up to it? Did you look at it that way? What were your thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. And I knew that I needed to be a provider, not just, with money and financially, but also spiritually, providing for and protecting my family. So deeply developing my prayer life, my spiritual life was super, super important for me. But also I wanted to, be able to provide financially, like I mentioned. So I studied finance. I knew that I had a knack for business. I really enjoyed it. I had a little bit of business experience up to that point. And so I just felt like God was kind of calling me that way based on my gifts, based on my desires. And so that was really good too. But when it came to the relational stuff, communication, handling conflict, all those things, I definitely had so much to learn. And so I read a lot of books. I went to therapy, did a lot of therapy, especially over the years after my parents split. And that benefited me a ton, and, just had couples that I looked up to, but it was certainly a struggle. It's not something, and this is something we typically see with young people from broken families, especially once they hit that age where they, start dating seriously. It can be a scary thing. And you feel, again, incompetent. Like there's a lot of skills that you lack, virtues that you lack, that maybe other people who grew up with mom and dad putting on a pretty good example of what it looks like to love one another, you kind of catch that stuff, right? The whole saying that way more is caught than taught. I think that's so true. It's our parents' example in many ways is just kind of ingrained into our DNA. Can we relearn that? Can we overwrite that? Absolutely. I definitely believe that. That's what I'm trying to do in my own life. I've been married 7 years now. I have 2 kids, another one on the way. And, kind of going back to my story, I'm not, was able to get porn out of my life and no longer addicted to that. I no longer struggle with bigger constant emotional problems. And, like I said, we've been able to build a little family of our own. And there's always challenges. There's always things to be worked on. But thankfully, by God's grace, I was able to work through a lot about that. But no, I think what you're saying, Jim, is a great point. Like overall, as a culture, as a church especially, we need to take marriage much more seriously. And I wish we had some sort of a years long formation that would prepare you for the sacrament, because it's just as grueling and serious as the priesthood or religious life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Joey Pontarelli is with us, restoredministry.com. Share with us about post-college, so moving on from college, and also maybe share the story of meeting your wife, and then the particular discernment there. So you knew, probably called to marriage, but then to actually meet the woman and discern, okay, this is the woman I'm called to marry. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Absolutely. Like I mentioned, there were actually 2 other girls who I dated who are amazing Catholic women who, really helped form me in a lot of ways, even though those relationships didn't work out. We weren't called to marriage together. And so by the time I got to, dating my wife, we had met at Franciscan University. We really just became friends. She worked a similar job on campus that I worked. And so, we slowly, gradually built our friendship. Eventually, toward the tail end of my time at Franciscan, I wasn't planning on this. I kind of thought I'd leave Franciscan without, anyone, given the way that some of my other relationships had ended, and ended up just deciding to ask my wife out on a date. And we went on like our first date a week before graduation, which maybe necessarily wasn't the best idea, but it was, it ended up working out. And so I, after Franciscan, I actually went to Italy to teach English for a few months. It was just something I wanted to do, nothing related to the business world or my major. But I went over there. We stayed in touch. We kind of thought maybe that we would drift apart, but that wasn't the case. We, stayed in contact. We would FaceTime each other and got to know each other more. I came back to the States and went to see her, visit her family. And that's when we began our relationship. And so, a couple of years later, or let's see, it was about a year and a half later, a little under 2 years, I guess, we got engaged, and I had moved out closer to her to live near her, so we could date kind of in the same zip code. Got an apartment out there, and yeah, that's kind of the quick version of the whole process. But it certainly was a kind of step-by-step thing. But I think one of the differences I realized with her, there was still the fear and anxiety that had come with earlier relationships, but I just felt more competent. I had a little bit of experience navigating relationships, and there was certainly something, there was a greater peace there as well. What I tell young people, especially who come from divorced or broken families, you can't always trust your emotions, because if there's a lot of fear and anxiety, then it might be telling you not that this person is necessarily not good for you, but that there's a lot of brokenness and there's a lot of there are wounds there that need to be healed in order for you to build love. But in this case, I'd found a lot of healing, and through therapy and mentorship and through my prayer life, by God's grace, and I was in a better spot, even though there were some things to work through. So we dated long distance for a year. Just to summarize this, then I lived close to her for another year. She lives out in the Philly area. She lived out in the Philly area where we live now. And then we got engaged. We actually moved to Denver. There was a friend of hers who needed a roommate, so she moved in with her friend. I moved in with a house of guys. We lived out in Denver, where there's a great Catholic community. We planned a wedding from a distance, and then got married. I think it was 9 months later, and loved every bit of all of that. So that was our discernment, and happy to go into anything else you want to know.
Sure. Very cool. And so, talk about children. So then family life, what was it like when pregnancy came, and then the birth of your first child? Did that stir up some unexpected things? What was the experience like for you?
Yeah, and it's a great question. I was always excited to be a dad. I was the second oldest of 6 kids and loved kids, loved being around them. Even, when friends had kids or there were families I was close to, it was always a great thing to be around the kids. We my daughter Lucy, so we did have a miscarriage our first pregnancy, which was a grueling experience. I know there's a lot of, families who go through that, and it's a difficult thing. It's not talked about a lot, but that was like a really, really difficult thing. It was an early miscarriage for us. But still a heavy thing. And so we got pregnant with my daughter, Lucy, and we were just so excited for her to come along. And so once she was born, there were certainly, challenges along the way. It's kind of overwhelming for young people, like where I'm sure, the listeners can relate if they've had kids. You get pregnant, and there's all this information about like pregnancy and doing that well, and then you have to think about the delivery, and there's all this information, a plethora of it to learn about that, and then you have the baby, and you're like, whoa, we gotta figure out how to nurse this baby and take care of the baby and bring the baby home, and then there's the parenting aspect. So it's a lot. It's an overload of information, more than anyone I think can handle. But thankfully we had good people in our corner helping us. But just loved, even from the beginning, despite the challenges, loved being a dad, loved holding my daughter Lucy and eventually playing with her. And I wasn't sure, like you had mentioned, kind of what my experience of fatherhood would be, given my background. But definitely, I think what I see in so many young men from broken families is we want better. We want to give our kids maybe what we didn't receive. And that was certainly my desire, even though, I had to stumble a bit along the way. One of the kind of interesting struggles, I had Sister Miriam James Heidland on my podcast. We talked a little bit about this. I remember having this struggle in my relationship with God when I became a dad. I kind of assumed that once I became a dad, I would have like this greater insight into like God the Father. I would understand him better. And it actually brought some more struggle into my life. I didn't quite understand like why God maybe didn't make his love more obvious for me. And it was this really kind of tough but honest place I was in my prayer life. And so I remember just bringing it to God. That was one of the things my spiritual directors taught me, like God can handle all of it. He can handle your anger. He can handle, your frustration. He can handle your doubts, your questions. And so I remember bringing it to him, and the answer didn't come at once. But just like with my parents' divorce, I'd recognized that he was right there in the midst of it all with me. And one of the things I learned was that, when I wanted to make my daughter's my daughter feel loved, I would just show her. I would make it obvious. And so my question for God was like, why don't you do that more for me? And what I was missing, I remember walking my daughter. I was walking in the stroller. We were heading to Adoration down the street, and I remember my phone kind of malfunctioned. I'm like a tech guy. I understand this stuff pretty well. And my phone like malfunctioned. It turned on a song I hadn't heard in like years. And I was like, this is so odd. This wasn't even on my playlist. What's going on? And it was really wild, Jim. It was like almost as if God was speaking to me. I don't have like a lot of these experiences, but it was almost as if he was speaking to me through the lyrics of this song. Just telling me that essentially like he was right there with me. He wanted to make his love more known to me, but so often I'd been resistant to it. And I'd even been blind to the situations where he did make his love known to me. So that was a beautiful experience and definitely a growing moment for me. And so I think, now we have 2 kids. We have John Paul, he's our next, and we have a third on the way, the later this year. And I think, I've heard Jason Everett, I remember saying that children are the sandpaper of sanctity. They definitely, kind of root out the vices and help you build virtue. And I would say that's so true. So I definitely am a better man because of them, even if I don't handle every situation perfectly.
Wonderful. Joey Pontarelli is with us, restoredministry.com. We're going to get into his good work when we get back. He has gone on to be an author, speaker, podcast host. His online content has helped hundreds of thousands worldwide. He wrote the book, It's Not Your Fault. His podcast, Restored, Helping Children of Divorce. We're going to get into all of it when we get back. Stay tuned. Welcome back to The Simple Truth. Jim Havens here with our guest today, Joey Pontarelli. He is the founder and president of Restored. Restoredministry.com is where you can find him and his good work, restoredministry.com. Joey, I want to lead into your good work by asking you about what has taken place, I guess, over the years with respect to, you talked a little bit about your relationship with your mom after the divorce of your parents. How has that developed? What is your relationship with your mom like at this point? Anything you can share with people that might be helpful, as well as your relationship with your father? Anything you'd like to share there that might be helpful to folks that are listening?
Yeah, no, great question. It's definitely grown over the years, I would say. There's been some difficult conversations along the way. There's been some struggles along the way, as every family has. But I think especially when there's a divorce, when there's maybe dysfunction that was in the family, there can be particular challenges to navigate. And so, there's been seasons where I remember at one point, my dad some struggles with mental illness, and he was just in a tough spot. This is when they were going through the divorce. And I remember just saying that I wouldn't talk to him for a while. And it was not because I wanted to be mean to him or show him that, or be like unloving or anything. It was just that I felt I needed to put up a boundary that communicated, I do not approve of what you're doing. And so what I told him in the letter is I said, Dad, I love you. I want a good relationship with you. But I feel that if I continue on in our relationship like normal, it's almost me tacitly approving this bad, obvious behavior that I'm observing. And so until, I see this changing, like, I'm sorry, but I can't have a relationship with you. And I said, I look forward to the day when this does change and I want to resume and restart this relationship with you. And it took like 1.5 years for that to happen. And it did happen to his credit, and we resumed our relationship and we're in a much better spot today. But, I had to kind of have that difficult conversation. I put it into a letter because I felt, given the kind of uniqueness of the situation, that was the best way to communicate what I wanted to. And that was, a hard season, but a necessary one. And it ultimately led to, us even having a better relationship today. When it comes to my mom, she, has bent over backwards for us kids in so many ways. And certainly, she'd be the first to admit that there were certain struggles on her. And just like we all have struggles, I know I do have shortcomings. And so, so I think one of the hardest things I think with any divorce is the parents kind of coming to the realization that, man, the things that led up to it, maybe the divorce itself, it did some damage to my kids. It's a hard thing to say. A lot of parents aren't totally aware of that. Even if they are, it's really hard to swallow that. But I think there's so much freedom in it. And, one of the things I always say to parents, if I'm speaking to them, is I say, in my ministry especially, we're not here to turn kids against their parents. That's not the case. In fact, we want to help them come back together and build good, healthy, strong relationships. Because so often what happens after a divorce, a family falls apart, is that there's such a rift. There's a big split between mom and the kids, or dad and the kids, and it can be devastating. The kids who desire that good relationship with their parents, the parents who desire the good relationship with their kids. And so, I've definitely gone through, to answer your question about my mom's seasons, where there's been more struggle there. But I'm happy to say that, while it's always a work in progress, it's definitely better than it has been in the past. And so I think, the honesty is a big thing. There's always, there's this one therapist I listen to. He's an evangelical guy, but he's really spot on so much. His name's Jay Stringer. He writes on like sexual compulsion and addiction and healing, getting over pornography, things like that. And had him on my podcast. And he always says there's this difficult tension that we've have between honor and honesty. We want to honor our parents for the role they play in our lives. We want to, make sure that we respect them and the reputation, everything like that. At the same time, we need to be honest, because if we're not honest, then that leads to living a fake life, maybe filled with lies. And so he says we have to find the middle ground, because in some cultures, he referenced like what Eastern cultures, like Asian cultures, there's maybe an overemphasis on honor. Like no matter what your parents do, you can't say anything bad about it. You can't speak honestly about that. That's unhealthy. Here in the West, in America, we might veer a little bit more towards the honesty side, where we maybe go and defame our parents, or we're not as kind in maybe speaking truth. And so we might go to that extreme. But so we need to find this middle ground, because, hiding is not the right option. Living a fake life, being dishonest is not the option, is not the right thing. So it's a difficult tension, but I think it's a tension worth trying to figure out. And you're probably not going to get it perfect right away, but that's, I think, something that young people, especially if they're listening right now, I would encourage them to do. And even parents listening right now, if you've gone through a divorce, if you've been in a situation like I'm describing, it's so helpful to just acknowledge your kid's pain. And without, defending yourself, without explaining things, it's just so helpful. Kids never really hear this, even if, and by kids, I'm not just saying like young people, but young adults, even adults. It can be so helpful for a parent to say like, hey, like that was hard. I'm really sorry. I know there was a lot of things that happened maybe out of my control, but here are the things that were within my control. And, maybe I could have done better, and I'm really sorry about that. And you'd be shocked by how much that will help your relationship.
Joey Pontarelli is with us. So, Joey, share with us the story of how you got into doing this as work in terms of the healing and the resources. And you've thought deeply about this and share the fruits of it for so many, so helpful. Again, restoredministry.com for folks that want to learn more. But how did this come to be? How did you discover this path and really a calling and say yes to it?
Yeah. So like I mentioned before, when my parents split, it had a deep impact on me. I started dealing with emotional problems, relationship struggles, bad habits, and,
Okay, I think we lost Joey. We're going to try to bring him back in as soon as we can get him back. We want to hear this story of how he got into this good work, this calling from God. This is a very, very important ministry that he does. Again, restoredministry.com. And just wonderful. Again, his book is It's Not Your Fault. And his podcast, Restored, Helping Children of Divorce. So some great resources there, but also the website, restoredministry.com. And we'll reconnect with Joey as soon as we can here to hear that story, hear more about that good work. But whatever it is, whatever your story is, if you have some connection to divorce, maybe your parents divorced, maybe you divorced in your own story, your marriage didn't go the way that you would have expected, didn't work out, whatever it is, I think fundamentally what we need to remember is what Joey was just sharing, that honesty, right? And that coming to the Lord our God with that honest heart and that humble heart, and saying, here's the difficulty, here's the mess, I'm struggling, come Lord Jesus, and invite him into it. and ask him to help. We need his help, whether we realize it or not. If we don't think we do, then that means we need it more than we even. That means we need it even more if we don't think we do. So we're always in need of him, and so to remember that, and remember to draw close to him, and to develop that life of prayer, to be faithful to that. Everything's going to flow from there, and if our hearts are truly open, we are going to receive so much from him, so much healing from the inside out, and so much blessing. And this is all real. And at times, we can be tempted to think it's not quite real. At times, we can get quite upside down in our thinking. Again, all the more reason to humble ourselves, to be honest, to come back to him, and to invite him in. And this is why we have prayer lives that are continual, that it's not we just pray once and then we're good for the week or good for the month. It's daily. And multiple times per day, really turning our hearts and our minds to God until to the point where it really can become, by God's grace, a sort of praying without ceasing, a continual prayer of the heart that goes on throughout the day, regardless of what we're doing. But we can't fake this. We can't just go through the motions on this. It has to be real. It has to be sincere. And that means we do have to be honest about our own sins, weaknesses, and failings. We can't pretend that they're not what they are. We can't pretend that they're not there if they are there, and just go about our business as if we're playing make-believe. We got to be honest about these things. Praise God for the great grace of the sacramental life of confession, where we can go and we can meet with Jesus there, and we can lay out our sins honestly, and he can take those sins and fill us with his grace. And if it's mortal sin, the serious sin, grave matter, not just what we think is serious, but what the church is clearly saying, this is grave, this is serious matter, and whether you think it is or not, it is, like blowing off Mass on Sunday for no reason. That's grave matter, right? We're basically in that situation just saying, God, I know you said, I know this is a command, but I'm gonna do what I want anyway. I'm just gonna blow it off here. Not that important to me. That's very serious, right? We cannot be doing that without taking on serious consequences from that serious action. And the consequence of a mortal sin is that the life of sanctifying grace is snuffed out in our souls. We die a spiritual death when we commit a mortal sin. That's why we should never want to ever commit a mortal sin. Do whatever we can to reject temptation as it comes, especially to do anything seriously wrong as a mortal sin. But it's also why when committed, we need to go find a priest as soon as possible, and we need to lay it out honestly and say we're sorry to our Lord in that person of that priest in the confessional, and let him take the sin as he has promised to do when we sincerely lay it out, and to fill us once again with new life, with that sanctifying grace, and everything will flow from there. So certainly healing into our hearts, but there is a certain temporal consequence that remains, right? This is true for original sin. This is true for our personal sin. There's, to me, it would always be better had we never committed the sin, in the sense that something has happened. You can think of it, I like the example, I think it's one of the books of C.S. Lewis, The Chronicles of Narnia, the magician's nephew, when they're in the world of Charn, I think it is, and they ring a bell that they're commanded or they're told not to ring, and it's rung. And once the bell is rung, you can say you're sorry, you can even be forgiven, but the bell was still rung. Something still happened. There's a consequence that now has to be dealt with. And that is the case. So spiritual healing, yes, we need that, but there are still temporal consequences in our lives. That then there's a sort of, once we've committed a grave sin once, even if laid out and forgiven, there may be a tendency that comes as a consequence. We already did it once. Maybe the devil can pick up on that tendency, on that temptation, and say, well, you already did it once. wouldn't it be so bad if you just did it again? Different things that can then be there because it was committed and that you have to now contend with, and to be aware of that, and again, make that firm purpose of amendment, that resolution to say, no, I'm not gonna go that way. And I say no to the temptation as soon as it arises, particularly the sin of pornography that Joey was talking about works this way. That it's a very clear example in terms of a serious sin that yes, can become habitual very easy. And then one has to contend with that, even if they're having good confessions and they truly are remorseful, sorry, laying it out and being forgiven and receiving that new life, that sanctifying grace. The temptation is going to come stronger if you are habitual in going down that road. It's going to take greater effort, greater grace, because that temptation will come, and it will come strongly if that's something that has been taking place in one's life. Now, I will say that if you continue on resisting that temptation, and it's best to resist it at once, as soon as you first detect it, and going and confessing very truly when a sin is committed. If you do that, and if you are faithful to really participating by God's grace, putting the effort in, you will start to move in that other direction where, the temporal consequences will be more and more undone. And there will be greater and greater freedom. And this is all real. And so I just want to encourage whatever those sins are, perhaps, that one might be not wanting to acknowledge them, say you're sorry, and get on that path to freedom. We're going to be right back. Stay tuned. Welcome back to The Simple Truth. Jim Havens here. We've got Joey Pontarelli back with us, restoredministry.com. All right, Joey, we lost you. You were sharing the story on how the ministry got started.
Sorry about that. Yeah. So after my parents split, just seeing all this pain, all these problems come into my life, seeing the same in my siblings' lives, even close friends of mine. I remember at least 5 families growing up who were these good Catholic families going through divorces and extreme dysfunction. And just over the years, just recognizing that so many of the struggles that I had stemmed from the breakdown of my family. And so I started reading the research and just getting really curious about this topic, and just recognizing, like, okay, this is a big problem. Every year, there's over 1 million American children who go through their parents' divorce, according to the U.S. Census. They define child as anyone 17 and younger. It doesn't include situations where there's, never been a marriage to begin with, which is becoming more common today. Stats like that. Other stats, like if you come from a divorced family, you're 2 to 3 times more likely to get divorced yourself. And I wanted to prevent that in my own life, but I knew there were other people like me out there. And so eventually started Restored. And we help teenagers and young adults who come from divorce or dysfunctional families to heal and build virtue so they can break that cycle and, build a better life, build the relationships that that God's calling them to, and ultimately that they want. Because what we see is, like, if you go through life with all this unhealed trauma, all this brokenness, all these wounds, and you're living a life of sin, of vice, then the chances of you having healthy relationships are pretty low. You're going to have unhealthy relationships, a weak marriage, and probably repeat that cycle of broken families. But if you can heal that trauma and you can build virtue, then you can go on and build healthy relationships, a strong marriage, and a holy family. And in my opinion, that's what's going to transform our culture. Because as St. John Paul II said, as the family goes, so goes the nation, and so goes the whole world in which we live. And so that's our bet. We start with the individual. We start with the young people who have been through this particular wound of their family falling apart, their parents getting divorced, separated, or maybe things just being really dysfunctional, even though mom and dad do stay together. And so we put out content primarily. We create content that makes healing simple, that makes virtue building simple. We have a podcast. We have a book. We do speaking engagements. We have free video courses that we give away. We're putting out a lot of short form content now on social media to reach young people right where they are in the digital continent. But again, the whole vision is that if we can help them heal and build virtue, then they're going to go on and build the relationships and marriages that God wants them to, and help them avoid the exact opposite, which is their marriage following the path that their parents did.
Mm-hmm. Phenomenal. Yeah. Tell us about the book. It's Not Your Fault.
Yeah. One of the things I looked for growing up was, after going through my parents' split and just dealing with all these pain and problems, is I wanted someone who would just offer some really practical guidance on all the challenges that I face, whether it was the kind of the trauma itself, navigating the divorce, like how I felt about that, the realities of that, but also my relationship with my parents, how to set proper boundaries there and how to have a good relationship, how to support them in the proper way without maybe creating an unhealthy dynamic. Relationships, like I mentioned, were just a huge struggle, a scary place for me. I didn't know how to go about building them. A lot of emotional problems I mentioned, like anxiety, depression, loneliness, things like that. So after facing all these problems, I knew that there were answers out there through, good psychologists or even just from our Catholic faith. And so we wanted to put them together in like a really easy to use book that was accessible for young people. Because again, when I looked around for help when I was younger, I didn't find anything. I didn't find anything practical. I didn't find anything for a young person. And so the book is a Q&A format. So really short questions and answers. You don't have to read it from start to finish. You can go to the section on, navigating your relationship with your parents or romantic relationships or, healing, whatever it is. And you can just read that question, that answer. And within a few pages, you've got, something to get you started and hopefully to even go deeper after that. And so that's the book. It's Not Your Fault, the practical guide to navigating the pain and problems from your parents' divorce. And again, it's just what I wish I would have had growing up. And so we're trying to build resources like that for young people, so that when they read it, whether they buy it for themselves or if you're someone who has young people in your life who come from broken families, you can gift it to them. We just keep the cost as low as we possibly can, and again, it's just meant to be kind of a mentor from afar, guiding them through all these really messy waters that a lot of people don't even talk about when it comes to broken families.
Yeah, Joey Pontarelli is with us, restoredministry.com. Joey, we've got a few minutes left. Just want to give you the floor. Anything else you want to share with us today?
I would just encourage everyone listening. There's people in your life who, are carrying all sorts of brokenness. And I'd say a lot of them are carrying brokenness from their families. Relationships so often are where, we're wounded. And we need to heal. We need to heal. There's nothing more healing than God's grace. There's nothing more healing than a relationship with God, than a relationship with Jesus, than just being in Jesus's presence. And so I would, encourage you to do that for yourself, because you can't really offer what you don't have. If there's people in your life who, you see that they're broken, you see that they're struggling, you see that they need healing, start with yourself. We've learned that from the 12-step programs, that if you want to help someone else, work on yourself, and they'll hopefully be inspired by your example and just want what you have. And that's going to be a much more motivating force than anything that you can say. And so that's where I would start. But if there's young people in your life who you're eager to help, you want to help them, maybe break from the bad habits that they're struggling with. You want them to learn how to overcome or better navigate the emotional problems they're struggling with, or, maybe encourage them to, discern their vocation, especially if they're called to marriage. And so all of those things, like, we exist for that. We want to come alongside them, mentor them, help them through the content that we create. And so we're here for you. And we even have a video course on our website. It's called Real Help. And it's all about how to confidently help someone who comes from a broken family. Because the big problem, Jim, that a lot of people face if they see a young person who comes from a broken family, they don't really know what to do or say. And so we just did a deep dive on the research and all these stories that we were hearing, and put together some principles that people can use to have a conversation with someone who comes from a broken family, from a divorced family. It's things to do, things to say, but also things to not do and not say that might actually cause more harm. We try to, simply summarize the research and some of the other lessons that we've learned along the way. So that's a free video course on our website called Real Help. If you just go to the website, restoredministry.com, you'll see that there. But I would say those, especially with this audience, there's so many people hurting from these wounds, often hidden wounds that aren't talked about, because, as you know, Jim, there's so many broken families in our culture. So there's so much dysfunction within our families. Divorce is a really common thing these days. And so it's pretty common to know someone who comes from a broken family, to the point where we almost assume that, well, since it's so common, it's quote unquote normal. And therefore, if it's normal, then it must not be that big of a deal. But if you actually read the research, like the psychological studies, the sociological studies, you'll see like, my goodness, children of divorce are less likely to get married. They're less likely to have kids. They're more likely to get divorced. They're more likely to struggle with emotional problems, behavioral problems, social problems, like more likely to struggle with drugs and alcohol, more likely to struggle with violence. Like the list goes on and on. It's pretty depressing. But once we understand the problem, a problem well defined is a problem half solved. And so we're trying to get awareness out there that, hey, this is at the root of so many of these problems that we see in our culture, whether it's homelessness or abortion or, struggles with lust, pornography, things like that. So often at the core of all those is brokenness. And so often the brokenness is rooted within our families. So our bet is that if we can start healing that and addressing that brokenness within our families that we received in our families, then we're going to start to reverse that tide. And our ultimate goal, like I mentioned before, is to build a Catholic culture where people build, healthy relationships, strong marriages, and holy families, and the human person flourishes and souls are saved. Like that's why we're on this earth. And so that's what I would just encourage people to start with yourself, start with your own healing, find where you're broken, seek healing through God's grace, but also through good therapy. Try to find a very competent therapist. And then the people in your life who are maybe struggling because they come from a broken family, they've sustained a lot of dysfunction, encourage them to heal too. And I think it's such a great investment for these young people, especially because they have the rest of their lives ahead of them. And if they're able to heal and build that virtue now, my goodness, their life can look completely different than if they wait 10, 20, or even 30 years.
Yeah, Joey Pontarelli, what a blessing. Thank you so much for being with us today. Restoredministry.com, restoredministry.com. Thank you, Joey.
My pleasure.
And I can't echo enough what Joey's been sharing on this show today. I do have, come from a divorce background myself. And I'll just say, look, bringing whatever it is, whatever the brokenness is, bring it to God sincerely. Invite Jesus into it. He can bring great good out of a mess. So let's trust in him. Jesus, we trust in you. God bless you all.